They said the baby couldn't stand anyone. Dozens of nannies came and went, each one quitting in tears. The child would scream, thrash, even hold his breath until he fainted. No one could touch him, not even his own father, the billionaire who built an empire but couldn't calm his only son. Then one morning something happened. A woman walked into the mansion, an older black cleaner named Ruth. She wasn't there for the baby. She was there to mop the floors. But the moment the baby saw her, he went silent. His tiny eyes followed her every move. When she bent to pick up a toy, he reached out and kissed her cheek. The room froze. The cameras caught it. And that one simple kiss exposed a secret the millionaire had spent years and millions trying to bury. The mansion that never heard laughter. The mansion sat on the edge of the city like a fortress of glass. People said its owner, Nicholas Harland, could buy anything except peace. He was a young billionaire, the kind that made headlines for every deal and donation, yet lived behind locked gates and tinted windows. His wife had died giving birth to their only child, Noah. From the moment Noah was born, strange whispers filled the house. The baby wouldn't stop crying. Doctors came and went. Therapists, specialists, even musicians. Nothing worked. The staff learned to tiptoe through the marble halls because a single sound could set the child screaming for hours. Nannies never lasted more than a week. Each one left with trembling hands and tear-streaked faces. Nicholas watched helplessly from behind the nursery glass, his eyes hollow. Money bought equipment, experts, imported toys, but not comfort. Then one Tuesday morning, the agency sent someone new. Not a nanny, not a nurse. Just a temporary cleaner to help the overworked staff. Her name was Ruth Walker. She was in her late 50s, quiet, graceful, with silver threads in her hair and a slow, steady way of moving that made the chaos around her pause. When the head housekeeper introduced her, no one paid much attention, except the baby monitor blinking red upstairs. Ruth had cleaned hospitals, schools, and homes all her life. She didn't have fancy degrees, but she had seen things most people looked away from. Sickness, loneliness, love, loss. She believed every space kept memories, and every child carried stories they couldn't yet tell. As she worked through the morning, she hummed under her breath, a tune she used to sing to her own children when they were small. It wasn't loud, just a soft rhythm steady as breathing. Halfway through mopping the nursery floor, she felt the air shift. She turned away and saw him. Baby Noah was watching her from his crib, his tiny fists gripping the bars. For the first time that anyone in the house could remember, he wasn't crying. He was listening. Ruth froze, unsure what to do. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that comes from somewhere deep, untouched by fear. "Hello, little one," she whispered. Noah blinked. Then he reached one hand through the crib bars. It was such a simple gesture, but the camera in the corner caught everything. The small, trembling hand, the woman kneeling beside the crib, and the faint hum of a lullaby that seemed to calm even the machines. Downstairs, the intercom crackled. "What's going on up there?" The butler's voice came through, alarmed. Ruth didn't answer. She was too busy watching the impossible, the child's eyelids fluttering shut, his breathing evening out, a tiny sigh escaping his lips. For the first time since he'd been born, Noah fell asleep peacefully. When Nicholas rushed into the nursery minutes later expecting screams, he stopped cold. Ruth was still kneeling, one hand on the floor, the other resting lightly on the edge of the crib. The baby was sleeping, his small chest rising and falling like quiet music. "Who told you to touch him?" Nicholas demanded. Ruth stood slowly. "No one, sir." "He reached for me." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the baby monitor. Nicholas looked from his son to the woman, trying to make sense of it. Every expert he'd hired had failed. Yet a cleaner, a stranger, had done what none of them could. "Tomorrow," he said finally, his voice low. "I want you back here. Same time." From that day on, Ruth's routine changed. She still cleaned, but every time she passed the nursery, Noah's tiny laugh followed her like sunlight through curtains. The other staff whispered, wondering how it was possible. Was it luck? Was it something in her voice? Or was there something else? Some invisible thread connecting the cleaner and the child. Late at night, when Ruth finished her shift, she'd sit outside on the stone steps, looking up at the mansion's glowing windows. She wasn't sure why she'd taken the job in the first place. She'd almost turned it down, but something in her heart had said go, and as she listened to the faint echo of a baby's laughter drifting through the night air, Ruth felt a chill. The kind that tells you you've stepped into a story much larger than yourself. The whisper in the halls. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion began to change. It wasn't something you could see. It was something you could feel. The constant tension that once hung in the air began to ease. The endless crying that haunted every room started to fade, replaced by the gentle sound of a baby's laughter echoing walking down marble corridors. The staff noticed first. "Ever since that woman showed up, the baby's been different," whispered the cook. "She's not even a nanny," said the gardener. "Just a cleaner. How does she do it?" Ruth said nothing. She never bragged, never explained. When Nicholas asked her one morning what she was doing differently, she just smiled and said, "Children don't need to understand words, sir. They feel what we carry." That answer lingered in his mind. Nicholas was a man who measured everything in numbers: net worth, efficiency, results. He'd never believed in things you couldn't calculate. But watching Ruth hold his son, watching his child fall asleep on her shoulder without fear, he began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there were things his money couldn't buy because they couldn't be bought at all. One afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled in from the bay. The sky went black, the wind howled, and rain lashed the mansion windows like pebbles. Power flickered, and the lights dimmed. Most of the staff retreated to the lower levels, but Ruth stayed upstairs. She found comfort in storms. They reminded her of long nights in her childhood home, where her mother would hum gospel hymns until the thunder faded. That's when she heard it, a faint sound, like paper tearing. She turned and saw one of the nursery's picture frames had fallen. The glass cracked. Behind the frame, a piece of folded paper was wedged in the corner of the wall. She hesitated, then gently pulled it out. It was an old letter, yellowed with time, sealed with wax. Her hands trembled as she read the faded name on the envelope, "To my son, for when you're ready to forgive." Her heart skipped. The handwriting, she knew it. It belonged to Evelyn Harland, Nicholas's late wife. Ruth quickly tucked the letter into her apron just as she heard footsteps behind her. Nicholas stood at the door, drenched from the rain, his eyes sharp. "What are you doing?" he demanded. She turned slowly, the letter hidden in her pocket. "Cleaning up, sir. The frame fell." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Stay with Noah tonight. The power's unstable. He won't sleep otherwise." Ruth nodded silently. That night, as the storm raged, she sat in the rocking chair beside the crib. The letter burned like a secret against her heart. She hadn't seen that handwriting in over 3 years. Not since the night Evelyn had shown up at the shelter where Ruth volunteered, pale and shaking, holding her newborn baby. Ruth remembered every detail. Evelyn had been kind, gentle, terrified. She'd told Ruth she couldn't trust anyone, that her husband's empire was swallowing her whole, that she wanted her baby to grow up knowing love before money. Ruth had watched over them for weeks, bringing food and warmth until one day Evelyn vanished. 2 months later, Ruth saw her picture on the news. Gone, leaving behind only the child she'd once cradled in that same blanket Noah slept under now. Ruth closed her eyes. All this time, she'd been cleaning the same halls Evelyn used to walk, singing to the same child she'd once held. But she couldn't tell Nicholas, not yet, because the truth wasn't just about Evelyn. It was about the promise Ruth had made. "If anything happens to me, make sure he grows up loved, no matter where he ends up." In the morning, Nicholas found her asleep in the rocking chair. Noah snuggled against her chest. For the first time in months, both of them were at peace. He didn't wake her. He just watched. Something in that moment cracked open inside him. Later that day, he called her to his study. He offered her a full-time position, not as a cleaner, but as Noah's caretaker. Ruth hesitated. "Sir, I'm not qualified." "You're the only person he trusts," he interrupted. "That's qualification enough." She agreed, with one condition. "No cameras in the nursery," she said quietly. "The boy deserves to be seen as a child, not a problem." Nicholas didn't argue. From that day on, Ruth's presence became the heartbeat of the house. Every morning, she'd hum softly while opening the curtains, letting the sun pour in. Every evening, she'd rock Noah to sleep with that same tune Evelyn once loved. And slowly, something else began to heal. Not just the child, but Nicholas himself. He started coming home earlier, sometimes lingering by the nursery door, listening. He'd ask questions about lullabies, about how Ruth had learned to calm children so effortlessly. She'd smile faintly. "Experience, sir?" And listening, really listening. But behind her calm eyes, the secret grew heavier. Every day she waited for the right moment to tell him what she knew about the shelter, the promise, and the letter hidden in her apron. She didn't want to destroy his world. She wanted to mend it, because she'd realized something. Sometimes the truth doesn't hurt people. It heals them, if told with love. By the end of the second month, the mansion had changed completely. Where there was once silence, there was now music. Where there was fear, there was laughter. But as peace settled in, a shadow began to stir again, in the form of a visitor who showed up unannounced one crisp autumn morning. A tall man in a dark suit stood at the gates holding a small leather briefcase. When the butler asked who he was, the man smiled and said, "I'm here on behalf of Mrs. Harlan's estate. There are things her husband never received and things he was never meant to." The gates opened slowly, and Ruth, watching from the upstairs window, felt that same chill again. The feeling that the past she'd tried to bury was about to walk straight through the front door. This sets up a strong emotional mystery. The letter, Ruth's promise, and the stranger arriving all build tension toward a powerful revelation. The letter that changed everything. The mansion was unusually quiet that morning. Noah was still asleep. The rain had stopped, but the air outside was heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. Ruth stood in the hallway, staring at the man in the dark suit as he stepped inside. His shoes clicked sharply against the marble, echoing through the silence. Nicholas came down the staircase, his expression tense.
"Who are you?"
he demanded. The man bowed slightly. "My name is David Sinclair. I was Mrs. Harlan's attorney. I believe I have something that belongs to you." He opened the briefcase and carefully pulled out a small wooden box, sealed with wax identical to the one on the letter Ruth had found. Nicholas frowned. "I thought I received everything after her passing." "Not everything," the lawyer replied softly. "Mrs. Harlan left this with strict instructions, to be delivered only when the household found peace again." Ruth's breath caught. When the household found peace again. Those were Evelyn's words. Nicholas gestured toward his study. "Let's talk inside." Inside the study, the lawyer placed the box on the desk and slid a thin envelope beside it. "This letter will explain what's inside." Nicholas broke the seal carefully. Ruth stood by the door, silent, unsure if she should stay. But Nicholas didn't send her away. He simply began to read. "My dearest Nicholas, if you're reading this, it means our home has found warmth again. I know it was cold for a long time, not because of winter, but because grief can freeze even the strongest hearts. I want you to remember something we both forgot when money became our language. Love is not measured in comfort, but in care. The woman who will help you remember this, you already know her. Her name is Ruth. She helped me when I was afraid and alone. She showed me that love can exist in places untouched by wealth. Please trust her as I did. She carries no secret but kindness, no debt but gratitude. If Noah smiles at her, it is because he feels what I once felt. Peace. Let him grow up around that feeling. Let him learn that compassion, not privilege, is what saves us in the end. With love, Evelyn." Nicholas's hands trembled as he set the letter down. For a long moment he said nothing. The room felt heavier, quieter, as if the air itself was grieving. Ruth lowered her eyes. "She came to me before she passed," she whispered. "She never told me where she was going, only that she wanted her son to grow up knowing love." Nicholas looked at her, tears threatening to break his carefully built composure. "All this time I thought she'd run from me, that she didn't trust me." "She did," Ruth said softly. "She just needed to find herself again." "You both did," the lawyer gently cleared his throat. "There's more." He opened the wooden box and revealed a small silver pendant, shaped like a heart, engraved with the words, "Where there is love, there is life." Nicholas picked it up slowly. It was Evelyn's, the one she'd worn the day he proposed. He closed his hand around it, and for the first time in years, he wept. Not the quiet kind of crying that men hide behind their hands, but the deep, raw kind that breaks through every wall you've built to survive. Ruth stood still, her eyes glistening. Then, without thinking, she placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "She wanted you to heal," she said, "and so did I." A small sound broke the silence, Noah's voice from the doorway. He was clutching his blanket, eyes sleepy. "Daddy?" he said. Nicholas turned, wiping his face quickly, forcing a smile. "Hey, buddy." Noah toddled toward him, but paused halfway, looking at Ruth. He lifted his tiny arms toward her. Ruth bent down, scooping him up effortlessly. He laid his head against her chest, content. Then he did something that made Nicholas's heart clench. He held out the pendant in his little, hand and placed it against his father's chest. It was as if Evelyn herself was still speaking through their child. Nicholas knelt down in front of them both. "Thank you," he whispered, not just to Ruth, but to his wife, to his son, to the world that had somehow given him one last chance to feel alive again. Later that evening, the storm finally cleared. The sun dipped low over the estate, painting the sky gold and crimson. Nicholas stood on the balcony, holding the pendant tightly. Behind him, Ruth was rocking Noah to sleep, humming the same lullaby Evelyn used to sing. When the final note faded, he turned and said quietly, "Ruth, I want to honor her wish. I don't want you to work for this house anymore. I want you to be part of it." Ruth blinked, taken aback. "Sir, I don't—" "Your family now," he interrupted gently. "You were there when love left this house, and you're the reason it came back." Tears filled Ruth's eyes. She nodded slowly, unable to speak. That night, as the mansion's lights flickered warm across the hillside, the echoes of laughter returned, soft, real, unforced. And in the quiet, Ruth finally opened her apron pocket one last time. Inside was the original letter she had found behind the nursery frame. She didn't need it anymore. The message had already done its work. She walked to the fireplace and watched the paper curl and turn to light, just as a new sound filled the air. Noah's laughter, bright and endless, chasing the ghosts away. The climax resolves every mystery: the letter, the lawyer's visit, and Ruth's connection with healing, not shock. It's the kind of twist that moves hearts rather than just surprising them. Perfect for virality with emotional and family audiences. Full circle hope. 3 years later, the Harland estate looked nothing like the mansion it once was. The towering iron gates were still there, the gardens still immaculate. But what had changed was the feeling. Where cold silence once ruled, laughter now lived. Children ran through the courtyard, their voices echoing off marble walls that had finally learned to hold joy instead of sorrow. At the heart of it all stood Ruth's community house, a bright, open building built right beside the mansion grounds. Its sign read, "For every child who needs to be seen, heard, and loved, the Evelyn and Ruth Foundation." Nicholas had poured his fortune into it, but he always said the real investment came from Ruth's heart. Inside, volunteers helped children from nearby neighborhoods, some orphaned, some lost, all searching for the warmth Ruth had once brought into one child's world. There were no gold frames, no marble floors, just colors, light, and music. And at the center of the main room was a large mural, a woman holding a child, surrounded by a swirl of light. It wasn't signed, but everyone knew who it was. Ruth herself still worked there, though her hair had turned silvery white. She didn't move as quickly as before, but her presence filled every corner. Noah, now a bright and curious 5-year-old, followed her everywhere. He'd help carry books, wipe chalkboards, and sometimes he'd ask her to tell Mama Evelyn's story. Ruth would smile softly and say, "It's not just her story, little one. It's all of ours. About remembering what love looks like when life tries to make us forget." Nicholas often watched from the doorway, his expression one of quiet gratitude. Since that day with the letter, he had changed in ways even he couldn't explain. He still managed his companies. But now, for every new business he opened, another school or shelter followed. He spent more time with his son than with his board of directors. And whenever someone asked what had caused his transformation, he'd just smile and say, "I stopped counting profits the day I started counting blessings." One afternoon, a journalist from a national magazine came to write about the foundation. She expected to find corporate charity, sterile, performative. Instead, she found a family. Ruth sat with her on a wooden bench under the old oak tree, the same one where Evelyn used to read. The reporter asked, "What made you stay here all these years?" Ruth looked out at the children playing and said, "Because love doesn't leave when it's hard. It grows roots." The reporter blinked, tears glistening in her eyes. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "May I quote you?" "You can," Ruth said, smiling. But make sure you quote them too. She pointed at the children. They're the reason we're here. That night, after the children left, Ruth sat by the piano in the main hall. Her hands trembled slightly as she played the lullaby, the same one she'd sung to Noah when he was just a baby. Nicholas joined her, standing quietly beside the piano. She'd be proud, he said softly. Ruth smiled, not stopping the melody. So would you, he shook his head. You gave this place life, Ruth. I just followed your lead, she laughed gently. No, sir. You followed your heart. They sat there for a while, letting the music fill the empty hall, the same hall that once echoed with grief, now filled with peace. The next morning, the mansion hosted its biggest event yet, the foundation's anniversary celebration. Families from all over the city gathered to share food, stories, and laughter. Noah ran through the crowd, clutching a bunch of white balloons. When he spotted Ruth, he ran to her, shouting, "Grandma Ruth! Look what I made!" He held up a drawing, a house with a sun over it, and 3 stick figures holding hands. That's you, Daddy, and me, he said proudly. And who's that? Ruth asked, pointing to a smaller figure in the clouds. That's Mama Evelyn, Noah whispered. She's smiling at us. Ruth's eyes shimmered. Yes, baby, she is. Nicholas joined them, his arm resting lightly on Ruth's shoulder. Together, they released the balloons into the sky. Hundreds of white spheres floated upward, glowing gold in the sunset. As they disappeared into the clouds, Ruth whispered a quiet prayer. Not for herself, but for every child who would walk through those doors, searching for the love they'd lost or never known. A few months later, the story of the Evelyn and Ruth Foundation went viral. The headline read, "The Billionaire Who Built an Empire of Love," but in every interview, Nicholas corrected them. I didn't build it, he said. She did. He pointed to Ruth, always smiling humbly in the background. And every time, Ruth would just shake her head and say, "Love built this. We just followed where it led." Years later, when Ruth finally retired, she left a single note for Nicholas and Noah. It was written in her gentle, looping handwriting. Take care of each other. And when you help someone else, don't do it because they need you. Do it because one day you needed someone too. They framed that letter and placed it in the entrance of the foundation, right beside Evelyn's pendant, now encased in glass. Together they became the symbols of everything the mansion had learned. That love outlasts power, that kindness outshines wealth, and that sometimes the smallest act, a kiss from a baby, a song in the dark, can change everything. As the years passed, thousands of children walked through those doors. Each one found hope in the place once haunted by silence. Each one carried a piece of Ruth's warmth out into the world. And in the evenings, when the lights went out and the halls grew quiet, you could still hear it, faint, soft, like the wind whispering through the trees. Where there is love, there is life. This story reminds us, wealth can buy comfort, but only compassion brings peace. A cleaner taught a billionaire that love doesn't belong to the rich or the poor. It belongs to those who give it freely. And maybe, just maybe, the world would change if more hearts loved like Ruth's.